Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events this afternoon. And today we are really excited to have Will Thomas here visiting us remotely from Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is his brand new book, Dance with Death. And we just got in a nice little stash of signed copies that he was kind enough to autograph for us. And in the fullness of time, we should be joined by another author, Karen Odden, who is going to come in and talk a little bit to Will. And so she hasn't joined us yet, but we're trying to find her. She says, I'm here. Okay.
Liquid author, I just love it. Well, let me start while Karen is, talking to Patrick. Let me say how delighted I am to see Will. I am such a fan of his Barker and Llewellyn Victorian series, which gives kind of a nod to Sherlock Holmes, but is unique. Thomas Llewellyn is Welsh, and therefore has an interesting backstory, life of his own. He's been much in love with and pursuing a young Jewish woman whose family disapproves of him. And so he's got a lot going on as a Watson, and Cyrus Barker is a fabulous character. Anyway, Will, congratulations from book 12 in this series.
I can't believe it. It's still scratching my head going, how did this happen?
That's a really excellent question, but I'm glad it has. I've been reading it in real time, from the beginning. So what inspired you to pick these two characters and write Victorian, but yet, there she is, hi there, to write Victorian, but at the same time give a nod to Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes?
Well, when I started out, I was a teenager, was in love with the Sherlock Holmes stories, of course. And there was a club here in Tulsa called the Afghanistan Perceivers. So I joined, and it was interesting because I was 17 and the average age was about 54. So they didn't know what to do with this, a yappy dog that was me, always wanting to interrupt the meetings and things like that. So they made me the book editor, and I would write book reviews. And, that was their way to get me out of the way. So basically, I started giving myself an education, Victorian fiction and Victorian history. And at some point, I became a purist. I felt that, any plans I had to write the great Sherlock Holmes novel were done. I felt that only Doyle could write Doyle. And so at that point, here I was with all this information in my head and no characters to write about. So at one point, I came up with two different characters. I couldn't decide which to do. One was it was basically Barker. It was a guy from China, and rough-hewn and, rough in every way. And the other was his polar opposite, which was kind of a dandified, Oscar Wilde type, something like that. And then I have what I call the 4 o'clocks, which is ideas that come to me exactly at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I stood up at 4 o'clock in the morning and went, one's working for the other. And so that's how it started. At that point, it all gelled together really quickly. I went.
Well, it's been fascinating to read them along. Some danger involved is the first one, and as we've just told you, Dance with Death is number 12. And so if you haven't read them, you can have a wonderful time. You can start with Dance with Death, but you could also go back and read your way forward. So Karen Odden has now joined us, and Karen is a person who is also mad about Victorian, about the era. And Karen's written 2 books. Patrick showed you one, and she's going to have a new book, Departure, from the 2 that she's written, out in the fall, when we'll certainly be looking forward to launching that with her. But I thought that I would turn this over to Karen. Although she doesn't talk as much about Tsar Nicholas and why I think this is such a truly fabulous book, I'm going to interrupt her. Anyway, over to you, Karen. Well, I
am. Well, thanks very much. And I am so sorry. I was actually on the Facebook page, the fan link that you sent me, instead of getting onto the Zoom link. But this is typical. I don't know. It was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I have 2 kids and they're both very tech savvy, as teenagers are. And I was trying to do something on my iPhone, and one of them said, "You really belong in the 1870s in London. Like, you don't belong here." And so I'm sorry, I'm running late.
No, it's fine. We
So-
were having a very nice visit. No, but it is funny to think that, if the two of you are so immersed in Victorian, and yet here we are Zooming in 2021, which is
I know.
kind of
know.
weird. I find it
Yeah.
weird myself. I have tech support in terms of my husband. And I honestly, I have to go to New York tomorrow, and I'm really terrified because I have to do some work from there. I have to take a laptop with me, and it's like I'm heading off, Will. I mean, it's like I'm sailing to India or something.
Yeah.
I'm really worried, but then again, we have cell phone support, so there we are. Anyway, no need to apologize. I'm really glad you got to read this book after the many times I tried to prevent you by not getting it to you. And I'm hoping you loved it as much as I did.
I did. I did. And I have a bunch of questions that I would love to ask you. But first, I have to tell you that part of the reason I love this book so much, well, there are two reasons. The first one is that you feather in humor so beautifully. And it's so light, and it's not a big wink to the reader. It's not this. It's kind of like, and then you just keep on going. And it's wonderful. You're brilliant at it. Just even like this one moment on page 2. Here it is. This is the moment when Jim Hercules walks into their office, and sort of the inciting event for the whole book. And Jim, this is Llewellyn's comment. Llewellyn's the narrator. For those of you who are listening who don't know these people yet. He was well-groomed, fashionably dressed, and polite. He was an American Negro. The only time I had ever laid eyes on one before was at an outdoor concert in Hyde Park. The band had come from a town named Dixie, if I recall correctly, and were anxious to return. Again, it's so small, but they come every 2 to 3 pages. So the whole entire way, I find myself like sticking these little colored tabs in because I think this is really funny, and you do it really, really well. So I enjoy that.
Part of the backstory in it is that here was Llewellyn, a kind of romantic figure, going into prison and having some way to, to cope. And the cope is in the humor. And the humor comes out constantly because it's his go-to for, in any sort of defense, whether it's an argument or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I let him run unbridled,
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll actually, let him finish a whole thought, and then maybe I'll do a little slicing or splicing in the middle, to get to that one, that one perfect sentence, that one little comment in there that reflects his character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. That humor, he sort of formed humor as a defense, that then as a way of a coping mechanism for being held captive and all these other things. And because I notice that often it is at moments when moments of tension, when, for example, a new person they don't know walks in, or there's a moment later on in the book. It's let's see if I can find it. They're being introduced to someone new, and he says something along the lines of, the man introduces them as Baker and Lewis or something, and he said, "I let it go. We've been called worse." Completely mangles their last names. And he's like, whatever, kind of. And he's got this sort of roll with it quality, which is very charming and makes for a great narrator, as opposed to Barker, who, so far as I can tell, doesn't really have much of a sense of humor at all. He's very straight. Yeah. So, but I just know myself writing, I don't do humor all that well. I admire it in other people. So when I found it in your book, I really enjoyed that. And the other thing I truly love is how incredibly familiar you are with the world. There was a review someone wrote that they felt themselves these books are steeped in Victorian detail. And I definitely felt myself swimming around in a nicely steeped, teapot of Victorian tea. It was, even the metaphors you use, the mentions that you make of like Tennille's sketches. I came across, I thought, oh, Alice in Wonderland. And things like, even the metaphors, things like you'll say something like, a boy slipped by like a salmon on the river sleigh. Or it was like one of the butchers in Leadenhall Market threw a bucket of blood all over us. So even your metaphors the little tiny things that you slip into each sentence continually gesture toward that Victorian world. And that's another thing I really appreciate it. I love it. I'm sure that people who read your books really enjoy that.
Sometimes it feels like automatic writing. I'm sitting here, writing it, and he just takes off, and I'm just like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And then I'll finish and I'll go look at it like, wow, where'd that come from?
Mhm.
Occasionally he'll use words I don't even know. I have to look up. So
That's
it
funny.
looked
It's fun,
right.
it's
I
fun
just
when
had
they
to go
take
find-
over.
Right. Occasionally I'll have a situation where I have a term and I think, no, I want a British form of this term. What am I looking for? And I look it up, and that was the British term. It just comes automatically. I do come from a British family. I'm the firstborn, in my family, first generation, and we all came from Scotland. So my earliest memories are of being at Scottish games, and and there's this weird concept among Scots, and it is of like giving back, by which I mean, here you are a Scot, you better learn how to play the bagpipes, or you better learn how to play the drum, or you better learn how to dance, or there's also one more thing, you better learn how to write, because there's Stevenson, and there's Walter Scott and things like that. You have to continue. So this was part of my contribution. That sounds weird, but I actually felt that way when I was writing. It's just like, okay, this is what you have to, you have to contribute something.
Why did you make Thomas Llewellyn? I mean, by his name, we know that he's Welsh. Why did you decide he would be a Welshman rather than a Scotsman or even an Englishman?
Well, because they're the put upon group in England, as far as I'm concerned. And they're physically smaller and darker, and I like that. I like the connection, or the difference between him and Barker. Barker's so over the top large and everything like that they produce a nice set there that I enjoy working with.
I love the idea of giving back. I think that especially during COVID, I know I've received a few myself, and some of my other author friends have said that they've received letters from people saying that your book helped get me through COVID. It was entertaining for a day. It took my mind off of worry or something like that. And I love that generous impulse. That's really nice. I do have a question. So I was out to lunch the other day with Donis Casey and Reese Bowen. We were celebrating Reese's book launch day. And Donis said, sorry?
I saw the picture, yes.
Oh, you did? You saw the picture? Oh, you saw it on Facebook. Oh, because Donis posted it. All right. And she mentioned that both of you grew up in Tulsa, in
Yes.
Oklahoma. And so, of course, I grew up in Rochester, New York, which is very far from 1870s London, and Tulsa is very far from 1890s London. But I was wondering, if it's not too personal, what was it like growing up in Tulsa? Were you in the city or in the country? And where did books figure in there?
I grew up in a teepee. No, just kidding. No, Tulsa's a pretty modern city. It's say a liberal capital of Oklahoma. You've got Oklahoma City down south, and we're up north. It's nice. My daughter owns a ranch about 30 minutes from here, so I can get out there at any moment and ride or look after the horses there. So there's a chance. Here I am in the city, and then I can go out to the country pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of your favorite books as a child, or were you not much of a reader?
Well, it's interesting. I started out being a boy. I wanted things. Well, as I said, when I first wanted to get published, I said to my agent, I want my bucket of blood. I want to have some action. I want to have some blood. I want to have something going on. And so my first interest was horror movies, the old ones, the ones like the Universal ones and the Hammer ones. And my interest developed when I realized, hey, these are books. So I would get the books out, and I'd started going through all these and reading Dorian Gray and Dracula and Frankenstein and all the other ones. And at some point, the Victorian world that was there was so completely different from my life that I just absolutely loved it. And this combination of elegance and danger at the same time, this really struck me. And then as it turns out, both Hammer and Universal had a Sherlock Holmes. You know, they one had Basil Rathbone, the other had Peter Cushing. So I was watching those, and that became a continuation. I got out of the horror genre, but still enjoyed the Victorian era and all the things that were going on there. And so at that point, Dickens came walking in the door one day, and that was it. You know, and so between those, all those different authors, that's how I became interested and still have a big interest in the Victorian era.
Yeah. So, I mean, some people, I think is it Bleak House that has one of the first detectives?
Yeah.
I think it's Bleak House, right? Yeah, Sergeant Cuff. Yes, yes. And Wilkie Collins was a good friend of Dickens, and he wrote The Moonstone. So there was another one that was Inspector Bucket, I think. So, yeah, I sorry.
Mystery of Edmund Drood. You know, you've got Dick
Yes.
Datchery there.
Yep.
I'm obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, there was a lot of good stuff going on in the, mid 19th century. I mean, Russian stuff, there are detective stories in it, but, we don't think of them as necessarily mysteries. But well, I thought what was so interesting about this book, we're talking about Victorian and how, we're all immersed in it. But what you've done in this book is you've made us aware of Russia at this time by bringing the Tsarevich, Nicholas. It's 1 or 2 years before he actually, his father dies, and he becomes the last Tsar of Russia. But he's come to London for a royal wedding, which reminds us of Victoria, how big her family was, how many, I mean, she had a lot of children, she had tons of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all. So, it is a royal wedding because, I mean, we've seen a few fairly recently, and this one is going to be George V and Queen Mary, except right now she's Mary of Teck and George is a prince. Is Eddie's been dusted out of the way by now, hasn't he? The rather difficult older son.
Yes, he's gone.
Right. So George is clearly the heir to his father, Edward. So it's Victoria still alive. Then we're going to get Edward VII, and then we're going to get George V. But in Russia, we have this young Tsarevich. And I loved looking at Nikki through the eyes of all these people, both Russian people and English people, all of whom have a unanimous opinion about him, which I found completely fascinating. Is that based on anything that, or did you just decide that was going to be how it was? Or is there any diary or other physical evidence that people really thought about him as unsuited to lead?
All of the information I have found seems to agree, no matter where it comes from, that they knew at an early age that he wasn't going to be as suitable as, let's say, his father or his grandfather. Nobody knows. I can't exactly pinpoint it and say why, but they knew. But one thing interested me was the Atsu Incident, which occurred in Japan, which is his first time to go out of the country. He does an event in Japan, and in the middle of the event, he is attacked by a Japanese police officer with a sword. And the character that appears in the novel, his cousin George, not that same George, deflected it with a sword that he had, and was able to stop it. But so that was his first time out. This is his second time out, and he's close to a nervous breakdown. I'll put it that way. He's arrived. He is 21 years old. He's just a kid, and he's been given practically unlimited power. He's got a bunch of people watching him, but they have no control over him. So he's 21. He's going to do whatever the heck he wants. He's a spoiled brat let loose in London, and the only thing that can stop him is Thomas Llewellyn and Cyrus Barker. And when that idea came to me, I'm just like, yes. Now, not, the character of Nicholas isn't necessarily as wild as I'm portraying him historically. He was, more akin to, somebody who plays, collects stamps, but it was fun to work with that concept. and always coming up with new ideas. I want this. Let's do that. Let's stop whatever you're doing and babysit me and let me do what I want to do.
Well, the book depends in part on his remarkable resemblance to George, soon to be George V. I mean, they looked like, twins almost. And I've always found that really fascinating, how if you look at a portrait of each of them, you could just interchange them. And certainly that plays a role in your book. So I thought that was really fun. Sorry, Karen, I told you I was going to interrupt. Let me go back and hand it back to you.
No, that's okay. I know, and I was just thinking as I was listening to you talk about the scene, and I'm not giving too much away, it's not a terrible spoiler, but there's a scene when Nikki decides he wants to shoot a firearm, and they go down into this closed room, and all of a sudden Llewellyn's thinking, good idea, not a good idea. You could do and there's that really wonderful moment too, where he's got this ballerina love interest, and clearly she's trouble. Was she a real person?
Oh yes.
Yeah,
they created Swan Lake and the Nutcracker for her.
Was it? Okay. Yeah, that's what I was guessing when I saw that, because you interspersed some other real people in there, and you've done that in a couple other of your novels. I thought it was, but I'm reading along, and somewhere around page 20, I found Israel Zangwill, and I thought to myself, wait, wasn't he the one who did Melting Pot, which was a pretty famous play on Broadway? And you drop in William Morris, and I enjoyed that.
Zangwill's Thomas's best friend, so he appears in a lot of the novels.
He does.
Yeah.
It's like there should be a law saying you can't make an actual historical figure your character's best friend, but I broke it anyway. So
I appreciated that.
There's a wonderful set of notes in the back of the book, which I don't recommend you read until you finish the book, because there are some spoilers. But the real people, Will is very careful to tell you what happened to them. I mean, who they were and what happened. And I have to say that I enjoyed the story of the ballerina who is there hoping that Nikki will marry her. She is his mistress. And negotiations are going on for William to marry one of Victoria's I don't remember if she's a niece or a granddaughter, I can't recall. But anyway, Alex of Hesse. But Alex wants to hold on to her Lutheran faith and not convert to the Russian Orthodox Church. So there's all of that going on. So there's a chance the ballerina thinks that she might be able to marry him. And I don't know whether morganatic marriages actually worked in Russia. Did you look that up, Will? I mean, what would have happened if he had married her?
I have the feeling that Queen Victoria would have her day, even
I can't hear you.
in Russia. I said, I think that Queen Victoria would have her way, even in Russia, as far as I'm going to push this through and nobody better argue with me.
Well, George IV, when he was the Prince of Wales, he entered into a marriage with a Mrs. Fitzherbert, and she was Catholic, so the Succession Act actually blocked him from doing that. And I had wondered whether if the ballerina, I mean, spoiler, she doesn't marry him, but if the ballerina had succeeded in getting Nikki to marry her in London, what would have happened when they went back to Russia? Would it have been dissolved, not recognized by the Russian Orthodox Church? I mean, I just think it's an interesting question.
She was playing on it. She was hoping something would happen. Even though she's as young as he is, 21 years old, she's aware. She seems a more savvy person at 21 than he ever was. And so I knew she was playing on things like that, that opportunities are there. How far can she go? She came from a peasant stock pretty much, and she would just take it as far as she could possibly take it.
Well, it's a relevant question, because there's no question that the woman Nicholas did marry, Princess Alex of Hesse, who became Tsarina Alexandra, was also the wrong person to be on the Russian throne. And together they were a disaster in terms of ruling. They were sort of a happy family thing. I mean, they clearly cared for each other, and they had 5 children, and all the rest. Neither one of them was suited for the role. And and World War I presented so many stresses that in the end it collapsed. But I couldn't help but think if he married the ballerina, who I thought was really tough, that it might have turned out better for everybody. It was just like, oops, an opportunity missed.
Yeah. I'll have to tell Cyrus Barker next time I see him. No, you just let it alone. Let them get married.
Big mistake, right? Anyway, I thought this book was so fascinating because I don't remember reading at least a mystery in which Nicholas as a young man figures in any way. And there's an array of characters around him that Will brings in, relatives of his and so forth, that are completely fascinating. And of course, there were visits to London. I mean, it was the epicenter. Victoria was the, major ruler. And so people did show up in royal parties to do things. And it's fun to read about it. But I just thought you did a brilliant job.
It was, like I said, it was really fun to write. I enjoyed this one very, very much. And it was fun to play with. It was fun to create, at that point where I'm going, this is too funny. I don't know if anybody's going to believe this or not. And it really happened.
Was the masquerade ball a true episode?
That was not. And in fact, I was probably 3/4 of the way through it. And my wife is typing and editing and looking at everything. And she turns to me and says, "You are going to put a ball in here, aren't you?" And I'm like, a ball! Stop. You're right one. So it pays to be married to another mystery writer,
Yeah. Well, masquerades are so wonderful because they obviously they disturb notions of identity and stuff like that, but they collapse distinctions between, for example, ballerinas and princesses, or future czars and just sort of the gentleman who's kind of there. So you end up with a kind of a leveling that happens socially.
For example, in this story, one, whoever you're dancing with could be a police officer there to protect.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, that's when the dance of death actually occurs, when he's dancing and he meets the female character in the book.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
also gets into an argument with Matilda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you also, in this book, you do a bit of a dive into things that were beginning to bubble up where, anarchists are active, but socialism. And I actually did not know that William Morris was a leading socialist. That was, I always think of him as, wallpaper and the Chelmsford Press. Aha, there we go. Yeah, it's a very distinctive decorating style. And so I think of him as a printer and an artist, but I had no idea that he was a socialist. And he's kind of at the end of his career by now, isn't he, in this book?
Right, sort of out to pasture sort of situation. Yeah, he in his mind, I think he felt irrelevant politically anymore, and that's where he got his joy from, I guess you would say. And I wonder if he would even know, here we are 1,000 or 100 years later, and we're still using his prints for one thing or the other, wallpaper, ties, everything. He did so much, and he had such a broad range.
I'm glad you put it in the book. It was, it was fun to see him there. I've always been a huge fan of Edward Burne-Jones. I love his art. And I've always found him to be a fascinating character. So, but I'm not sure. He died fairly young, so I'm not even sure. Was he around when you're writing this book? Was he still alive?
Oh, he was gone then, I think. But he and he's a close friend. So they were together, and that's where he would have the painting over in his Jane Morris's painting. That's why he would have it from Jones himself.
Well, he's not going to appear in this book if he's dead. What a shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Was Rossetti part of that circle too? Dante and also Christina, they were, right? Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a real bohemian sort of thing. that went on there in that time period. And they did some remarkable stuff. I think, I'm trying to remember if it's Rodin. There's a school that I went to visit. I might have this all wrong because it's been forever. But for some reason, I think I seem to remember there was a lot of Burne-Jones art involved, but it may not have been Rodin somewhere. But anyway, he was very Arthurian. They had that whole romantic thing, the Lady of Shalott, and
The red hair.
There's a book coming out in August, which I think is really interesting. It's the whole story of Arthur told from, and the Lady of Shalott is the narrator. I signed up to host it just because I thought it would be fun to, immerse myself in that and talk about it. But they very much, that whole William Morris crowd looked a lot back on, those kinds, a lot of illustrations, in fact, of like Howard Pyle's books and so forth, all kind of tied into that. When I was young, those classics still had those illustrations. I mean, I can still remember, opening books and seeing that very William Morris with the long hair and the ringlets and the interesting patterned garments and people floating in the water and the whole bit. And part of that, I think, was a reaction to the rigidity of Victorian. They were wearing flowing dresses where women were actually trussed up in corsets and little cages for bustles and the whole bit. So I thought they were the breakaway crowd.
Yeah, so the romantics, a new generation of romantics. I always think of Burne-Jones and think of all the redheaded women he painted, and they always had the straight hair as opposed to the curly hair. But something about that made me think that she actually was using a model, somebody that really looked like somebody, not just here's my creation that I've done here. I remember one specifically on Mary. The mother of Jesus, had used a painting, had used a model as in the painting, and it was just like, wow, this guy's amazing.
So for our book, we have Cyrus and Llewellyn, and there's a lot going on in Thomas Llewellyn's personal life. He leaves us on a cliffhanger, the rat Will Thomas. So by God, he better write book 13, or I'm going to be really upset with him. But in any case, what we have is Nicholas comes to London, and there is rumored threat of assassination. And so that's why Barker and Llewellyn, the Secret Service, decides they want to hire them, which is pretty unorthodox in and of itself, but what the heck. And so that's, the book sort of pivots around, will Nikki survive? Or will somebody else die, or whatever? I'm not going to give you any spoilers here, but I thought it was an interesting premise.
I did too. I enjoyed it. I thought that I didn't know a whole lot about Nikki.
Not
at all.
young Nikki. I know a lot about
young
old
Nikki.
but
Yeah, well, that's
he's
the old Nikki is sort of the figure of sort of myth and story and everything. So the sort of young, the young sort of playful, troubled, wild card sort of Nikki was fun.
I also didn't realize that Victoria was so instrumental in Nicholas's marriage. I didn't. For some reason, it just didn't really occur to me. I thought it emanated from Russia, and they looked at available princesses or whatever and thought Alex would be a decent choice. But I didn't realize that Victoria, I guess she really was a matchmaker, wasn't she? She was very strong on that.
Strong, powerful woman.
Which is too bad, because her hemophilia was, again, one of the problems. If Victoria passed it on. And it's a really interesting question, which has been explored by Francine Matthews and writing of Stephanie Barron in one book. Why did Victoria have a hemophiliac gene? Because it didn't really show up until her. I think that's a great question. I keep hoping somebody will one day dig up who might have been her father. He's actually, they know where his grave is, and do some DNA testing. Although I think it would be so shattering to discover that Francine's thought that she actually was illegitimate would be, and that's the way that hemophilia came in, would pretty much rock boats. But I've always thought it was a fascinating idea. Why? why would she have this gene? Because it is a genetic thing. It should have shown up in the family before her. But unfortunately, she passed it on. And because that's what happens with hemophilia. And Nicholas's son got it. And,
Alexis, yeah.
yeah, and that played a big part of what went wrong in the Russian royal family. I mean, you don't deal with that in the book, but that's the part about Nicholas, I think, that most of us think about, was Rasputin and his son and all of that. And so it's fascinating to see him before he took any of those steps that led to, the man he eventually became and his death. I'm glad he was young and carefree for a little while. I really am, because his life turned out so badly.
I enjoy taking historical figures and getting them involved in a story before they became famous. So Israel Zangwill starts out as a teacher at 23 or something like that, and continues throughout the series. I've done Beatrice Potter became Beatrice Webb, who was a famous socialist at the time, and she comes into the stories, and it continues. I've got other characters in there that aren't famous yet, but are interesting now. So I enjoy working with those.
Well, you clearly love doing this. Have you already written book 13? She says, fingers crossed.
I'm just
Really?
finishing pages on it right now. So yes.
Wonderful. So Karen, did you have other questions you wanted to ask now that I preempted you out of them?
So can you tell us a little bit about the next book?
Yeah,
No.
I can. Well, just this one thing, and that is the fact that there's one thing that Barker has never faced in all these different novels, and that is a poisoner. So it's time for him to poisoner.
A poisoner.
Poisoner. Oh, perfect.
He's never had to dealt with this before, and it's not something he can punch. So basically, he gets involved in somebody being poisoned. I won't go into details, but it ends up backfiring, and the poisoner goes after him and gets into his house and gets into his offices and lays traps and things like that throughout the story. And pretty soon people one by one start dropping, and I'm talking about the people in his life. So that's the idea I came up with, and I'm deep into the middle of it right now, studying poisons and all that fun stuff that mystery writers get to do. Lucky
13. Why not?
I know I think it was a New Yorker cartoon I saw recently where they it was some sort of I don't know, almost like a NASA looking kind of CIA office, and the person's leaning over somebody else, and they're saying poison, murder, handcuffs. Oh, never mind, he's a writer. That's the bottom of it. There's a woman I in my next book, there is a serial killer. And when I was doing all my research on serial killers, there were lots and lots of them before Jack the Ripper, obviously. And one of them was a woman who poisoned 4 husbands and almost 20 children. But poison tended to be a woman's tool. Did you find that in your research?
Yes. In fact, we don't know what the gender is throughout a good part of the book. Mm-hmm. He's not going to say it's a male, it's a man, or it's a woman, It's
right.
Like a woman. So you have to definitely consider that, because yes, that was their abilities, were limited. So being able to poison someone was it. They're not going to get hands on a gun very likely.
Yeah.
Maybe a kitchen knife.
New kitchen knife. Actually, there was a really wonderful little article that I saw in a newspaper one time. I can't remember which one it was, where it listed all these various kinds of ways that women killed people in Victorian England. And I remember some of them were like potato masher. And I'm thinking to myself, like, potato masher, trying to figure out how do you use potato masher? Bong, right?
Okay.
But yeah, there were knives. There was some really curious ones. One was a wagon. I was thinking, how do you kill someone with a wagon? But anyway. That was
poison was harder to detect before the advent of, and sure. I think there's a long history of women and herbs and, plants and so forth, and an ability to, digitalis would have been really hard for Victorians to distinguish from real heart trouble. You know, I mean, arsenic would be.
Arsenic was common.
Yeah, but I mean, it would be more obvious, but I think that probably many people died and it was never even suspected that, that they had been poisoned because there wasn't a lot in the way of detecting them. So it's definitely time to bring a poisoner in. Well, I think that's a splendid idea. Let's call Patrick up from his black box and see if he has questions from the audience or comments. I always love waiting for the screen to resolve here. So there he comes. It's like a magic trick.
Let's see. Let me just see here. Well, our friend Donis Casey has tuned in.
Hi, Donis.
She has a couple of questions for both of you. She says, I'm incredibly impressed with Will's research about the era. Both Will and Karen are so talented at evoking time and place. Do they research first, then write, or research while writing, or both?
Well, I did 20 years as a librarian, so research is something I know a lot about. But I tend to keep timelines in my head. I started out in the first book and I had a list of the timeline from the Scotland Yard website. And eventually I ended up, collecting a regular historic timeline kind of in my head. So I knew as I was going toward the last book that we'll be sliding into the time when Nicholas would have come to England. So I was already stuck there in the back of my head. And at that point, I could just go and grab, all the research that I could get a hold of right on that time period.
So you're actually following a timeline as you're working your way along with the books?
Yes, when I first started, it was exactly like, okay, here I am on the Scotland Yard website. Here's this year. This is what happened,
Why did you pick one particular year to start as versus another? I mean, you have to start somewhere, but why did you decide to start wherever you started?
It started out just vague that I wanted the 1880s as opposed to the 1890s, because my theory was that I would have, a list of stories that might end up around 1900. But at that point, I'm looking at the Scotland Yard website, and there is a bombing at Scotland Yard in 1884, 2 months after the book I wrote. So naturally, their windows are going to get blown out, and naturally, Cyrus Parker is going to have to investigate. So that wrote itself. I mean, right there, just knowing that fact was in there that came after I started writing the first book. So yeah, that's been helpful very much. And I tell people, if you're doing anything historic, definitely get a timeline and see what's going on. And actually, you end up using a lot of different ones. Here's a timeline of William Morris. Here's another one of whatever various characters. You've got it right there, and you can connect the two together.
What's your technique, Karen?
Well, I have a timeline too, but I'm not smart enough to keep it in my head the way you do. When I was doing my oral exams for my PhD, one of the things I did to sort of keep track of, I did 18th and 19th century literature. So I kind of had to know history from roughly the long 18th century, which began in 1660 at NYU and went all the way up through 1901 when Victoria dies. And I created a document because it's hard to keep track of all of the kings and the changes of members of parliament and the prime ministers and the laws that are coming in. And, when certain acts happen and when certain wars happen, throw the Prussian War in there, so I had this huge document. And then when I started writing in the Victorian era, I dug it out and I just started adding things in. So as I'm researching, just to kind of get back to Donis's question, as I'm researching, I tuck things in there and I star the ones that I think, I'd kind of like to, that might be a good starting spot for a book. For example, the next book that I'm working on is about the Princess Alice disaster, which happens kind of like for you, 2 months after Down a Dark River ends. And the Princess Alice disaster was kind of like a mini Titanic. It happened in, I think it was September of 1878. And it was a small sort of pleasure craft that would go from the dock right near London Bridge all the way out to the ocean and back in a 10-hour swing. So you could hop on in the morning, get off and go to the pleasure gardens, hop back on, hop off somewhere else, hop back. I mean, and so there was no manifest. And so when a collier hit it and it went down in 4 minutes, 600 people died, and there was no list. No one knows who was on it. And I thought, what a remarkable possibility, right? I mean, maybe people pretended to be on it and escaped, or people were on it and their wife didn't know that they were on it with a mistress. I mean, there are all kinds of fun possibilities. So as I find these little factoids, I drop them into this big, huge document, which is like 30 pages long now, with a little star, like maybe a book kind of thing.
One thing I found when I was researching was that they didn't have passports. You didn't have paperwork. You didn't have to carry anything around that said who you were. They just assumed that you were who you claimed you were. And that's a big thing in Victorian London. I mean, as a writer going, okay, how do you prove who you are? What do you have that says you are who you claim to be?
Good point. Especially since we are now, I just checked in on my flight to New York tomorrow with United, and it's like page after page with numbers and documents, and the airline knows more about me right now than the bank. Really flabbergasted doing that. Your trusted flyer number and your United mileage number and your whatever. And now with computers, they match it all up, and if it's not you, if you're not answering correctly. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that is I can remember going to Sky Harbor and running to catch a plane with no ID, nothing. You had a little piece of paper in your hand, that was it. And how things have changed. It's just computers have introduced a surveillance to us that would have been unimaginable to the characters that you're writing about. Patrick, any other questions?
Let's see here. Well, I was just going to ask you both, when we were talking to Ann Perry right before this, she made the point that she's constantly struck when she's doing her research that, that people don't really change. Human nature stays the same no matter the time period, and when you read the ancient Greeks, and their basic behavior seems very contemporary. Are you struck by that sometimes when you're doing your research about how contemporary this feels? Or I'm not sure if I framed the question properly, but.
Okay, so in this book, we have this young lawyer.
Bless you.
And he meets the wrong girl. And his family doesn't like the fact that he's meeting this girl. And so there's a rupture going on. And that's basically the story of my novel. And my daughter comes up and says, "Is that about Harry and Meghan?" And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't realize that I put that in there. But I try to keep everything, basically what happened 100 years ago or 120 years ago is happening again. That seems to be the recurring theme throughout all my books. Every time I write something appears, in the headlines the next day that was exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that you mentioned, newspapers, and it came up in your book, but it's also a preoccupation I realize in all of mine, is the influence of newspapers to both represent, for example, the events or the news, and to produce it, to create it, to shape it in a particular way that has material effects in the world afterwards. And several times you mention, you'll have, for example, Scotland Yard say to someone, just make sure you keep it out of the bloody newspapers. Because newspapers were incredibly important in Victorian London. I mean, literacy rates were rising, the number of newspapers were sort of proliferating, and you had, the Beacon and the Tatler and, the Times and all these different papers. And so what I found in your books there's a kind of interest in the way that the police and the newspapers work together. And I'm interested in that as well. And I think that that's a very modern, very contemporary concern, how the newspapers are framing things for public consumption and how that has effects in the public. So that feels very modern to me.
I could reach behind me and pull out a dozen books on Jack the Ripper here, but I'm sitting there, a couple books ago writing about him and realizing right in the middle of it, with 200 pages written, how much the press invented Jack the Ripper, how much they controlled him. They probably named him, all these different things. I mean, he named himself if it was the one who wrote it, but he got it from a newspaper, idea. So yeah, incredible power that the press had at that time.
Then you have all the
Not like
penny
now.
dreadfuls, the penny dreadfuls that are being produced at that time.
Yep, the yellowbacks.
Yeah. And then when is William Randolph Hearst? When is his era? It's not too far away, right? It's creeping.
No, it's very much the 20s and 1920s and 30s well, no, that's not true, because
Right around
yes, the
1900, I'd say.
Cuban-American War, yeah, he was the Maine, and the battleship went down, and all of that incitement for America to fight that. I'd forgotten about that. But the other thing was going on too is there was a lot of serial publication in magazines, serial stories and so forth, which of course is where Sherlock Holmes appeared, in the Strand magazine. So, you're right, with the rise of literacy, there's not only a much greater consumption of news, but a greater consumption of stories. And, then it becomes hard to distinguish sometimes real news from stories, which is part of the problem we have today. The Arizona legislature, for example, the Arizona Senate has decided to do something that if you put it in a book, nobody would believe it. I mean, we have an election that's over, and they have decided to spend money and time hiring a firm that is clearly uncredentialed and prejudiced to recount the votes in Arizona for no purpose whatsoever, except to feed a narrative. It's the only possible reason to do it. And, and I think, okay, so we have sort of fact and fiction going to collide here. And who's going to actually believe the results of the count, given the reputation of the firm and the whole bit? Is the firm going to feel pressured to, say this was the count and give us a false result? I mean, the whole thing is nonsense. And so we see that going on right now, the same kind of things you're talking about. I'm sorry, but that just drives me crazy. What a waste of public money. And, I wish that people were forced to pay for this kind of stuff. I love Nevada. If you're going to do a recount in Nevada, the party that requests it has to pay for it. And I think that ought to become a universal standard.
Yep.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're just pissing money in the wind.
Yeah. People would think twice before they jumped to, oh yeah, let's just get a recount.
If Ms. Fan in the Arizona Senate were paying for this out of their own pocket, it would not be happening. And, it just drives me crazy that there's no real accountability. So, but that stuff goes back. I mean, you can trace that back through empire after empire, probably was going on in Rome, this kind of corruption or just whatever. Who controls the narrative is a huge question. It really is in the media, in history. So, it's great to be an author and you can control the narrative in your own book, right? So whatever other realities are in your book, you get to determine the reality and tell the story, which is fascinating. I love it. Anything else, Patrick, before we sign off? And also it'll shut me up.
Nope, I think that's just about it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you both. It's really been fun talking to you. I can't tell you how much I love this book, well, you've already figured that out. Dance with Death is just an extraordinary book. So if you haven't read Will and we piqued your interest, Patrick will again demonstrate. We do have autographed copies available and we urge you to get one. And we also have copies of Karen's book, which is the title of that one you're holding up.
This is the second one.
Okay. A Trace of Deceit. And Karen, what is the title of your book coming out in the fall?
Down a Dark River from Crooked Lane.
Down a Dark River, which I think, will be terrific to read. And it's not going to be a romantic Victorian. novel.
No, it's a little bit grittier than that.
Right. So it'll
Yeah.
be fun. Anyway, Will, it's lovely to see you. I'm glad that Zoom has finally brought you. Well, I'm trying to remember. You did come to Scottsdale years ago, didn't you? I'm sure we had you here once,
Twice.
twice. Great. Well, this is technology makes this possible for us to do it. So thank you for taking time to spend with us this afternoon. And thank you, Karen. And thank you,
Thank you.
Patrick, as always. So everybody have a great weekend.